Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications. Patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Stewart Muir, Executive Director of the Resource Works Society. Welcome back to the show, Stewart.
Thanks, Jim.
Stewart, Alberta's Energy Minister, Sonia Savage, has come up with some interesting figures and facts, and what are they, and what does it outline?
Well, there's one thing politicians are never supposed to do, which is speak the truth on things. They have aides around them. They have the party whips to also make sure that no true statement is ever made by a politician. Maybe slightly overstatement, but here's a case where it's absolutely true. Last week, Sonia Savage, the Energy Minister of Alberta, was on a podcast talking with some folks from the energy industry about issues in her space, and she made the following very true statement: now is a great time to be building a pipeline because you can't have protests of more than 15 people. Let's get it built. It sounds like a reference to the Trans Mountain pipeline, but don't forget there's also a second pipeline under construction right now in BC. That's the Coastal GasLink pipeline, which will serve an LNG plant in Kitimat. So there's the minister saying something that's actually, pretty obvious, because the fact is that some of those protest groups that are set up for the purpose of thwarting Canada's national interest, as defined by our own Prime Minister and our regulatory processes, they're not able to do that. And that's frustrating for them, but not for the vast majority of people who actually want these projects built. You look at by far the majority of members of Parliament in Canada are supportive of the pipeline. So for a provincial energy minister to make this observation sounds like a pretty ordinary comment to make, wouldn't you think? But here's the thing. It's become this little storm. Apparently she's not supposed to speak the truth. We have the international press has picked up on local coverage where people are upset she said something true. They have, at the Independent newspaper out of London, they've published a report on it, and even Greta Thunberg has jumped into it. And actually, I'll give Greta credit for this. She's made the observation that this is actually a true statement. She's acknowledged that. She says, well, at least we're seeing some honesty for once, which is a great acknowledgement of I think the fact that often there is a lack of honesty in things that are said about energy, a lot of dishonest things said about Canadian energy, Canadian oil sands. In fact, almost a non-stop torrent of misinformation for the purpose of keeping it in the ground, as some of them put it, or maybe to allow countries like Venezuela, which produce exactly the same product, to get their products to market instead of Canada's. There's a variety of motivations for this, of course, as there always are, but I just found it amusing. I actually tweeted about this morning, and a lot of people clearly are thinking as I am on it, because I generated a lot of conversation. It's a hot topic. What amazed me, Jim, is the amount of indignation from the political class that a minister of the Crown should be so free to make a true statement. The number of political hacks out there berating such a person for this statement is, I guess, indicative of frustration that you can't always control what comes out of a politician's mouth.
Well, she's just stating the truth.
Yes.
I mean, there's no beating around the bush, and she just, perhaps it's an inconvenient fact.
An inconvenient fact indeed. And so I think this story's got legs. We're probably going to see lots more coverage, which I think is great. I think people around the world will appreciate, hey, in Canada, they got some politicians who actually call a spade, and here's one who said so on this issue. Maybe we can have more of that in other countries.
Well, the Bloc Québécois, who wants to separate Quebec from Canada, has several seats in Parliament, and they could help, I guess, topple a minority Liberal government if they put their minds to it. And they're deadly against Alberta oil development, yet they don't mind taking the royalty money from that oil in the form of transfer payments. What's the deal behind that?
Well, that's the way our system is set up, and there's an endless lineup of apologists explaining, well, that's the way it is. It's because of taxes and areas that don't have things as good as they are in most of the West, and it's just a part of confederation that those who have need to give those who have not. And I think that's actually a principle that most Canadians do accept, except the reason it's become such an issue, and it is a big issue in the West right now, especially in Alberta and Saskatchewan, is this feeling that it's not a two-way transaction. Yeah, okay, we're going to give up the things that we produce so you guys can have some relief from the whatever it is. If you're in the Maritimes, you've got fisheries collapse and long-term poverty. Okay, we're down with that. And in return, all we ask is that you let us go about our business. That part of the transaction has, to a great extent, not been respected. We have seen a lot of industries continuing to experience real hardship in providing jobs and healthy communities all across the West because of interventions that are driven out of a whole set of different considerations that have got nothing to do with the West. So it's take, but when it comes back to giving back, there's nothing flowing. I mean, you even see the leader of the Bloc out there constantly. He was up with Elizabeth May in the Green Party. This is not a party with a practical agenda. It's really just talking points to seek the votes of a small fraction of the electorate aligned on certain issues. They don't have a leadership vision for the country. Yet there's the Bloc up there saying, we've got to stop Alberta oil, not Venezuelan oil or Saudi oil. They're fine with that. They just hate Canadian oil, but they love the money. So I think the hypocrisy inherent in this is one thing that we can never forget. That things are not to be explained away by academics who tell us that the equalization policy is the way it is because it has to be that way. It's in the Constitution, and you can't tamper with it. So don't be talking to us about your stupid ideas that we should have a fair way of negotiating, economic success for Canada. We don't need to take it from those people. I mean, it's really important that voters and ordinary people who do have a natural sense of what's right are not afraid and intimidated, badgered and bullied into being silent on this. We should be standing up.
Well, of course, with Quebec, with all of its corruption, which is well documented, how many mayors did they go through in a row who were found to be guilty of corruption? How do we know that the Bloc Québécois isn't taking money from Middle East sources to promote oil from there and be anti-Canadian oil?
Well, I guess you can never rule that out. I mean, it's an unknowable, and I think that when you look at the expressions of some of these political actors, it does unfortunately cause that suspicion. I don't think it's ever been revealed. The Montreal press in particular is pretty good at coming up with a good scandal when there is something there. In this case, I haven't seen it. So who really knows? I think a lot of it is just more pragmatic. I mean, a lot of Quebecers look at their own provincial electricity supply and they say, hey, it's 100% green. It's hydropower. Well, there's actually a lot of people, especially in the U.S., who look to Quebec and say, your hydropower is not green at all. It's destroying, precious ecosystems in your north. So it's not green. I think there will be a day coming when Quebecers who have been so sanctimonious about, pointing to the rest of Canada saying, look, we're so green and you're not. So we just want your money and we're going to badmouth how you produce national wealth. I think the time will come when they actually encounter resistance to getting their product to market. That's already happening, actually. They're unable to build a transmission line for some of what they must get to market. and that's causing real grief. And I'm sympathetic to that. I mean, we have to do these things in a responsible way, and there's a lot of groups that are, just as they oppose the responsible Canadian oil sands industry, they're also opposing the development of hydropower in the east. So, it cuts both ways, and I think not all Quebecers. I mean, so many Quebecers I know are staunch supporters of fair federalism that respects the West. Many aren't, and I think over time, the pendulum will swing, and there will be probably more Quebecers who have to realize that if we want to keep this show going as a country, we actually need to work together and respect one another. That would be, a new thing to a lot of Easterners.
Well, isn't it true Canada has a third of the world's fresh water? And wouldn't it be useful before it runs into the ocean that we might capture some of its energy first?
Absolutely. Yeah. That's been a foundation of the hydro industry since the 1950s. We've developed not only Canada's resources in big dams and run of river, we've also become an exporter of the knowledge and technology to do that. You look at companies like SNC-Lavalin. I know that may evoke certain things today when you say it, but it's a proud company with a long history of building hydro infrastructure around the world. I had a family member who was an engineer, hydraulic engineer, built dams from Nepal to South America to Greece and Canada, all over the place. And that was something that, because of our special endowment of the vertical drop that allows water coming down from higher heights to be tapped as it travels, and I think we retain that expertise. There's a lot of engineering know-how that continues to be part of our exports from really the resource economy, and it will probably remain as we see the need for more green electricity. And it's not just about wind and solar and things like that. You need to have reliable, long-term, stable, affordable sources of energy too, not just ones that are kind of attractive because they're associated with high technology and flashy electronic engineering. Sometimes the old basics, gravity and water, are pretty good when you're trying to design an energy system, and I think that's why we'll see it in future as well as we do now.
We'll have more with Stewart Muir right after this.
Abin Resources Limited is a gold exploration company with significant projects in British Columbia and the Yukon, trading on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol ABN, and the OTCQB, symbol ABNAF. Surrounded by world-class gold deposits and mines, Abin's 23,000 hectares Forest Kerr Gold Project is located in the heart of the Golden Triangle in northwestern BC. For more information, visit us at abinresources.com.
Engineer Gold Mines is focused on the exploration and development of the historic high-grade Engineer Gold Mine situated 32 kilometers southwest of Atlan, British Columbia. Engineer Gold Mines is fully permitted for surface and underground exploration with the drill program now underway. Engineer Gold Mines Limited trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol EAU. For more information, please visit us at engineergoldmines.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Stewart Muir. Stewart, the BC government, which is hanging on by one seat in the legislature, has negotiated a semi-secret deal with the hereditary chiefs of the Wet'suwet'en, who were opposed to the natural gas pipeline. However, you pointed out to us that 85% of the people there voted for the local Aboriginal councils who were in favor of the project, and they did not elect these chiefs who ran for election. Why is the government signing an agreement with unelected people?
Yeah, these things are complicated. I think the Wet'suwet'en story is excessively so, and there are local cultural conditions that apply. They've been documented in the Douglas case extensively in the courts. It's on the record. You can read the history of it. There's some good books that have been written about the experience of the Wet'suwet'en and the Gitxsan people north of that. where the rights and title issues come into it. And I think what's happened is we've seen private interests that are more concerned about ecological pressure movements to limit or stop development, who have come in recent years to identify some of the parties who are seeking to advance the genuine quest that Wet'suwet'en people, a very small group, under 5,000 individuals, to advance their aspirations. And I think there's been a very effective strategy over many years by some of the groups up there, like Skeena Wild, an environmental group funded predictably by American interests, to empower a small group of hereditary chiefs. Certainly not all hereditary chiefs. The hereditary chiefs that they dislike are women chiefs. They really don't like women chiefs, so much so that those hereditary chiefs who are now in the driver's seat were able to strip titles from the women chiefs, which was mind-boggling that they were able to do that. But what was truly mind-boggling was that the federal and provincial governments were willing to accept that, and never were any questions raised, nor were the interests of elected councillors respected in this. And I think right now what you'll hear from the spin people in Victoria and Ottawa is, oh, no, don't worry, we've got this great deal. It's going to be up to the Wet'suwet'en people to work it out. And what they'll do is, once there's some final plan to be ratified by the Wet'suwet'en people, it will be put to a vote, and it will succeed or fail based on its merits as perceived by, a democratic process. Now, the problem with that argument is, and I think the media has kind of accepted it, is that we didn't get, we got to the point we are now with that principle of ratification that's done on a fair basis being steamrollered by the advocates in this. So, back in February, March, when the Wet'suwet'en protests, or the protests in the name of a small number of Wet'suwet'en people, I guess more properly, led to a deal being negotiated, at that time, we saw a promise that there would be consultation with other members before the memorandum of understanding was signed, which ultimately it was on May 14th, just recently. And in fact, what happened, according to the elected chiefs who've written a couple of letters, and they've called for the federal minister's resignation over this issue, there was no process of consultation that reached a large number of Wet'suwet'en. There were some attempts at some online or Zoom town halls, but according to the elected chiefs, and there's I think 4 or 5, depending on the different letters and statements that have been made. So the majority of the elected chiefs, there are 6 villages, have spoken out against how things have progressed to date. And yet, again, they have been completely ignored by the federal and provincial levels of government. So I think people are trying to figure it out. They're trying to get their heads around it. At the same time, the thing that sparked all of this in the first place, at least ostensibly so, was the construction of the Coastal GasLink pipeline, which is still underway. And it was the blockade of access to an area to the west of Houston that precipitated the media spectacle, where it was all about the blockades, and then the blockades spread to other places, and people sort of took up this name of the Wet'suwet'en as if they were somehow acting for Wet'suwet'en people, which they clearly were not in shutting down the country. It led to this general havoc in the economy that was, we now know, after CN Rail reported its earnings for the quarter, a very significant damage to business. There were trains falling off tracks That doesn't happen by accident, but we don't really know too much. The authorities have been pretty quiet on how this happened. We've seen a capitulation by the provincial and federal governments in order to stop those protests. They just simply accepted something that is principally, fundamentally undemocratic in nature, and for elected officials who represent all Canadians or all British Columbians to do so in order to favor a basically feudal system is something that, hopefully in the BC legislature, when the House is sitting again, there will be an opportunity for an actual democratic discussion about it to bring some of the facts to light. There was a question yesterday in the House of Commons. The minister responsible on the government side gave an answer on this that was precisely, I measured this, 26 seconds long, in which he said absolutely nothing. I mean, just, the usual gibberish that they're handed when they need to shut down an issue. And, again, I think due to the complexities of this issue, it's just not something most of the media have got the bandwidth or time to figure out and be able to explain to Canadians. So it's taking maybe a little longer for that realization to occur, but I think if you have the chance, as I have had, to visit with certain communities, talk to leaders, I did that a couple of years ago, and again this fall, this past winter, I should say, I was in the area again. I've visited with so many people there and sat down with them, looked them in the eye, and asked them, what's going on, explain the situation to me. It allows me to be pretty confident in saying that what I see happening is quite an insult to those who believe that the self-determination of Indigenous people is a real priority for Canada, and that we must, get out of the way and let this happen. How do you do that when the first thing you do is you exclude most of the people who are affected by such movement? You keep them out of the process, and that's what's happened here. So, go figure.
We'll have more with Stewart Muir right after this.
Cypress Development Corp. is developing a world-class lithium resource in the heart of Clayton Valley, Nevada. The size of the resource makes the Clayton Valley project a premier asset with the potential to impact the future of lithium supply. Cypress Development Corp. trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol CYP, the OTCQB, symbol CYDVF, and on Frankfurt, symbol C1Z1. For more information, please visit our website, cypressdevelopmentcorp.com.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Stewart Muir. Stewart, what's going on with the Terrace BC Industrial Park?
Well, this is something I'm a little bit interested in. I've had a tour of this park. It's big. It's 2,400 hectares outside of Terrace, and it's called the Skeena Industrial Development Park. They've been working on it a few years. I think they've had a bit of a struggle in getting it up and running. Their timing wasn't perfect. They were hoping to get a refinery in the area and a few other things. It's been slow to develop, but I think the local economic development people had a good, credible vision about what's needed. So here's the big picture, Jim. The northwest of British Columbia has been talked about for probably a century now as really the place that will ultimately lead to the lasting prosperity of BC and arguably a good chunk of Canada too, simply because it's on transportation routes and it's close to Asia shipping-wise. So as long as you can get out to Prince Rupert, to where the port is, or to Kitimat, where another port is, or Stewart, BC, another port that is smaller and less known, but still crucial. You're in an area that's referred to by the mining people and the exploration people as the Golden Triangle, because there's so much mineral potential there for mines, many of which are already developed and being developed. You've also got the energy corridors, where through the mountain passes, pipelines, and the railroad do and will carry fuels, energy, materials, oil, maybe in future, certainly gas is happening. Carry it to the coast where it can get to market. Strategically speaking, it's next to Alaska. It occupies a very significant part of the continent when it comes to the linkage to Asia. So Prince Rupert Port has got now as well as the port that's been there a long time. You've got Ridley terminals. You've got other portside operations like that, which are growing. Ridley used to be a Crown corporation. It's been privatized now, and there's a lot of interesting things happening. The coal mines of the north are being supported through there. We'll see probably more coal from the south go through there. We're going to see activity in containers. So it's really a strategically important part of the world. And so there you have the city of Terrace, and it's on the Skeena River. It's not on the coast, but it's kind of in a triangle with Prince Rupert and Kitimat. You've got these three communities, and Terrace, in terms of the Highway 16 comes through it, is in a very key position. And so that's why in Terrace they have begun to develop this, and now they're talking about it. So it's in the news again, and I just thought it's interesting because you've got so much interest in the forest materials, seafood products. You've got even the potential for manufacturing, and this is something the Mayor Carol Leclerc, has talked about. Here we can have a place where you've got access to low-cost electricity that's green, just like down in Kitimat, where the aluminum smelter brings in ore from elsewhere in the world by sea. They put Canadian workers and Canadian electricity to bear on that ore, and they turn it into aluminum, and it's the greenest in the world, and then they ship it off to where it's needed. And that's utilizing that low-cost green electricity, which is a great asset we've got. And so if you turn that into manufacturing, if you take industries that require a lot of power in order to operate, you locate them in Terrace, you could actually go into areas of economic diversification that are beyond some of the traditional ones. So not only could this support all the traditional activities, it could bring in some new ones. So, keep an eye on that one. I don't think it's going to develop quickly, but it will develop in time. They've done all the work to put the services in. You could drive around. I had a tour of it a couple of years ago, and I was really impressed by the location. They've got an airport there. It goes back to the Second World War when they had to build serious airport infrastructure for the war effort. And as a result of that, they have the legacy of a, fantastic airstrip and well-located facility. So that's another asset as well that they've got going for them. So you put it all together, and I think the Northwest, even though it's been decades, if not a century in developing, will become a place that, certainly amid the growing aspirations of the Indigenous people, and there's many groups up there who want to be part of the prosperous culture that we have, will be able to do that while also preserving their language and providing opportunities for the young people and drawing those who have gone away back to their territories to be able to live and live well. I think it's a beautiful place as well, and I always love going up there. So there's my Terrace industrial development rent.
Japan and Alberta, do they have a new coal agreement?
Well, I think there's some interesting things in future. Last week, we had the news out of Alberta that the provincial government has made some changes that will potentially allow for some coal mining applications to proceed. It takes 5-7 years for this kind of thing to happen, so it won't be overnight, but it could be that we see a more British Columbia style of developing some of the coal deposits that they've got. I mean, you look at the open pit mines, which is a very effective way of getting at the deposits when they're fairly close to the surface, and that's what we have a lot of in BC. So you get that going in Alberta, and make sure it complies with the incredibly stringent regulations we have to protect the environment. So, nothing's going to happen that is unacceptable to our regulations. We had a new Environmental Assessment Act passed last year, so no one can really say that we haven't got that area covered. The economics of it, you might think, because we hear this all the time, coal is dead. Well, the truth of the matter is coal provides most of the world's electricity, energy today. Even Japan, a highly advanced industrial country, is looking again to coal. They have 22 new coal plants that are on the books. It's unlikely that all of them will be built, but the problem is that they need a great deal of electricity to maintain the Japanese way of life, and they've been getting that from nuclear energy. And those plants, because of the Fukushima disaster, which is now a fair number of years back, but that still resonates through their energy system, and they're looking for alternatives. That's why they want LNG, liquefied natural gas, from BC and elsewhere in the world, but it's also why they're talking about more coal. So
also, Alberta coal is what they call coking coal. It's very hard, and it's needed for processing steel because it burns at a very high temperature. Isn't that true? It's not
That's
your
right.
brown, what they call thermal coal that puts out big black clouds of smoke. This stuff, if you can ever say coal is clean, but it's very necessary to the steel making process, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah, they call it coking coal. They call it metallurgical coal. I think what the industry is starting to call it, because there's so many confusing terms, just steel making coal.
Yeah.
Because it does make steel. And don't forget, without steel, we can't make any durable structure. You need it for all of these things that we depend on for everyday life. So how do we get it in the most responsible way? I know there's people out there talking about hydrogen, how there is an alternative to coal for making steel, and that's true. It's a verifiable fact. There's an alternative, but like a lot of things, you've got a ramp for the growth of that alternative. And
doesn't it take a lot of electricity to make hydrogen?
It takes a lot of energy inputs, including right now natural gas. So we actually have the potential in BC to be a fueler of a hydrogen revolution. There's a lot of people in Alberta in the energy industry talking about this connection. You've got those who want to be a step ahead of that and say, well, we don't want to make hydrogen with natural gas. That's what we want to get away from. So we'd like to make it through, what they would term green processes. Now, the electricity is only as green as its source. Electricity itself is neither green or any other color. It's what it comes from that makes it, low or high or what have you in its emissions. So we'll see what the long future holds. No one knows right now. Those who are boosters of hydrogen say it's around the corner. And those who are advocates of acknowledging reality, myself included, would be, I think, sensibly of the view that let's adapt these innovations when they're ready, and if they need development prompting, they need to be put in the hothouse of technological development in universities or industry. Well, let's do that too, but let's make sure that when we actually adopt them as solutions, they are workable solutions. And right now, I don't think it could be said that there's a pivot off of steelmaking coal coming anytime soon. But things can change quickly, so let's keep up the innovation. For now, BC exports a huge amount of steelmaking coal, very dependent on it. We have new mines being opened and proposed. This is not, you often hear coal is dead, just like Elizabeth May was saying oil is dead. Well, that was unhinged. It's actually equally misleading to say coal is dead, because it's not. And of course it has issues. We know it has issues, but just as Sonia Savage was pilloried for speaking the truth about an issue, I don't think we should feel ashamed of acknowledging the basic fact that there's a lot of coal being put into ships today to go to places that are paying good money to get it because they need it. That's the reality. And so,
Well, don't they have scrubbers and all kinds of technology in modern day steel plants to remove the nasty stuff from coal, and basically you just reduce it down to heat?
Well, yeah. You want to capture the there's a lot of negatives from coal combustion, and managing those negatives is what you have to do to operate as industry, whether that's at the extraction end, the transportation end, people talk about dust from coal trains, or from the end use, the combustion of coal. And the scrubbers, as you say, those systems. You've also got carbon capture, which is a growing area, and I think coal is more susceptible to receiving the benefit of that innovation than some other types of combustion. You've got these massive long-term investments sitting there, so you want to capture the carbon. In Canada, at the Boundary Dam in Saskatchewan, there was a mission by the Saskatchewan government that has actually been remarkably successful to establish an industrial process to capture and sequester carbon from that coal facility. And it's a funny one, because if you hear people in Canada talking about the Boundary Dam carbon capture experience, usually it's dismissive. Oh, that's so expensive. Didn't really. Well, it was new technology, and it was like $1 billion project, and it hasn't changed the world or anything, but it has actually proved to be effective, so much so that other countries are coming to get it. I ran into someone from the Boundary Dam project not long ago, and they really are puzzled there that here in Canada, what they're accomplishing and doing isn't widely appreciated or talked about, and often it's just dumped on, whereas internationally it's become the standard. In fact, I was in Europe. I was talking to some people from the biggest European energy companies. They're building in the northeast of England a carbon capture utilization and storage system based on the Canadian technology from Saskatchewan. No one here is talking about that, but we're actually changing the world through our technology. And I think the reason there's kind of a desire not to see it talked about is it actually provides a practical solution to the combustion of fossil fuels. And those who oppose the oil sands and Canadian natural gas and things, they don't want it to be possible to use those resources. They want alternatives to those resources. They want the alternatives of their funders and their sort of favorite pet projects to become the dominant solution. So they're not interested in talking about how to improve the use of them. They just want to get rid of them. And that's really what drives, I think, a lot of our political discourse. That's, this thinking, which to me is wrong thinking when you consider that 80% of all the world's energy comes from fossil fuels today. That's reality. Let's work on reality rather than fantasy. We'd probably get further faster if we did so.
And Stewart, in our last interview, you pointed out with the Earth's transportation and industry basically shut down to just bare essential levels, it hasn't really done all that much to reduce emissions, and it might prove that the Paris Accord goals are impossible.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at BC's experience, we've had a carbon tax for a dozen years now, and it turns out that most of the greenhouse gas emissions that occurred in that time were because of industrial facilities that were shut down. And it's not because there's been some, tsunami of creativity among all people to rise to the challenge and use less fuel and emit less. It's just that, big chunks of production have disappeared. And that's not really what the problem is here. So, I think we need definitely to keep and increase the industry we've got, because that's what creates jobs and revenues to government, so you can have all the good things everyone demands, like, universities and healthcare. You gotta pay for it somehow. But you also have to do it in a way that uses, industrial processes effectively, and you've got to encourage, stimulate the development of technology. carbon capture is a made in Canada one. You know, I've met with the steel workers, the iron workers union here. They are big on this. They want to see it develop. They want to see it develop quickly. They love to build things that will capture carbon emissions, and they're looking at a lot of the technology that will enable them to be facilitators of that. You know, that to me is the practical thinking we need more of.
Stewart, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thank you.
My guest has been Stewart Muir, Executive Director of the ResourceWorks Society. His website, resourceworks.com. His Twitter handle, @SJMuir. If you have any questions for Stewart or any of our other guests, you can send them to info@howstreet.com. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Find us on Twitter @HowStreet. We're also on Facebook. I'm Jim Goddard. Thank you for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.